The Warriors. A storied franchise.
The Golden State Warriors have just won the NBA championship.
With a quiet leader.
The Curry quick release. Splash!
And a not-so-quiet one.
Rejected by Draymond. Knocked away. What a block!
And above all, a team that brings the entire Bay Area together.
Curry, one step in front of the logo. The right-hand slam and a little elevation. Sensation.
This is Warriors Live on 95.7. The Game.
And the Warriors return home tonight to take on a fairly inactive Brooklyn Nets team. It's a game that tonight I think the Golden State Warriors are looking at as a nice refresh, a little get-right performance after somewhat of a, interestingly enough, taxing kind of road/home set of 4 games last week as they again get set tonight to take on the Brooklyn Nets here at Chase Center. Evan Giddings with you live here at Chase Center. And right now, the Warriors, as we, again, are presented by Xfinity here on Warriors Live. Stream sports from the best seat in the house with Xfinity. Bring on the good stuff. The Warriors trying to bounce back right now at 12-4 after their first, I would say, their first disappointing loss of the season, their first real late loss of the year. Of course, that was on Saturday against San Antonio in a game in which they blew a 17-point lead with about 2 minutes left in the third quarter. It was at 10 going into the final and mustering 13 points in the last 12 minutes. A game that I think you could look at from multiple ways. And we'll set you up for Brooklyn, a game that should not be or I should say should be relatively straightforward. The Warriors are, I think, right now 12.5 or 13.5 point favorites. But the game on Saturday in San Antonio was not necessarily as straightforward. And again, it was the first time I think we saw a disappointing defeat, but also the first time we saw the Warriors tired. And I think it points to a couple of things to me. Number one, the misconception that depth is all of a sudden just going to make you run, sprint about 48 minutes a night. You know, I think the idea of these line changes that Steve Kerr has implemented kind of put people under the false premise that the Warriors are infallible to fatigue. And that's what we saw against a San Antonio team that had Wembanyama coming off of a stretch in which he missed a few games. He was fantastic in the fourth quarter. Harrison Barnes, a former Warrior, very familiar with, kind of put them away with that final bucket down the stretch. And even Chris Paul. But, you know, the Spurs are missing a few young players, even their head coach. But they were able to take it to the Warriors, so I think just kind of ran out of legs, ran out of energy in their third game in 4 nights. And that was something that Steve Kerr talked about pregame, is the fact that, you know, 3 games in 4 nights for a team that has been led, of course, by some of the elder statesmen of this group, Steph Curry, Draymond Green. The only player that really did not succumb to fatigue and hasn't over the last 4 games has been Andrew Wiggins. And I thought that was a really positive sight. The Warriors did miss Jonathan Kuminga on Saturday. As of now, he's questionable, and we'll have that hopefully for you as the Warriors get set again for a 7 o'clock tip against the Brooklyn Nets here. All action, as always, on 95.7 The Game with the great Tim Roy. He'll have you at the bottom of the hour. But the Warriors right now are a team that really has an opportunity tonight to just kind of settle some things, looking ahead at a week that has got a big game on Wednesday against the Oklahoma City Thunder as they come to town. They'll be without Chet Holmgren, but they're beginning to get whole as well. And so I think the Warriors are in a situation right now where atop the Western Conference, you know, this is a portion of the season and a portion, you know, kind of of games in which you're just looking to stack W's. They're 12-4. They're 5-1 at home. They get a Nets team that, despite being 7-10, is pretty poor and is without a bunch of guys. The lone real threat on this basketball team is, of course, their leading scorer, which is Cam Thomas, and who's averaging 25 points per game. It's not really been the way that the Warriors have approached things. Their leading scorer is Steph Curry, who's averaging 22 points per game. But overall, the Warriors have been able to use their depth to best a lot of groups this season, and I expect them to do so again tonight. So, again, following the back-to-back road games, New Orleans on Friday, which was a close loss, I think that led to what happened in San Antonio the night after, in which they went 1-1. The fact that they couldn't put away the Pelicans means a few players had to play extra minutes, had to exert themselves, and then they just kind of stumbled down the stretch in San Antonio. But, of course, also a few more things that the Warriors eventually clinching the NBA Cup Group C spot in the quarterfinals and knockout rounds. And then their head-to-head against the Nets have also been pretty promising and successful as well. 12 of the last 17 meetings ended in victories against Brooklyn, including 9 of the last 11 in the Bay Area. And a big reason that I feel like the Warriors have reason to believe that they should feel good tonight is someone like Andrew Wiggins. The positives from 3 of the last 4 games, and really all 4, outside of the defeat to San Antonio, point to where Andrew Wiggins is at. And it was something that I talked to Steve Kerr about before the game. I was asking him his pregame presser just where Wiggins is at, he feels like mentally, because I don't think any of the physical tools have ever been in doubt for Andrew Wiggins. He's coming off of a down season, averaged a career low 13 points per game, did not shoot it very well, particularly from 3. But I don't think that people really have looked at Wiggins as a player that is an offensive juggernaut, but he has just been quietly efficient this season. He's back to being the clear-cut number 2 scorer for the Warriors. He's shooting 48% about from the field, 41% from three-point range, even 77% at the free throw line, which right now would track to be a career best, but he's averaging 17 points per game. That's about where he was at in 2022-23. The only difference between now and then was, of course, he had a 3-month absence. The last time that Andrew Wiggins scored 4 consecutive games, scored 20 points in 4 consecutive games, was that 2022-23 season, a season that ended up going off the rails for multiple purposes. But Wiggins, at about this time, 2 years ago, was this player. And so the fact that last season he had such a down year, I think particularly shooting the ball from three-point range, it's good to see him back to where he's at. And I think Kerr kind of pointed to it not really being a physical issue, not being an issue about what Wiggins, is he slowing down? Is he not able to play as many minutes? No, everything just appears to be mental with Wiggins, at least the past couple of seasons, and it has to do with off-the-court issues. Obviously, the tragedy that befell him and his family this summer was something that was kind of underlying during, I think, for a lot of last season, but he's playing freely. And I think in terms of basketball, the biggest difference between last year and this year for Wiggins, in my opinion, is the fact that he has more of a defined role. Last year, because of Klay Thompson and I would say the emotional kind of battle that he was going through, wrestling with his career, wrestling with his role, wrestling with the lack of a contract, Klay was a player that was forceful offensively, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. But Wiggins is not that forceful of a personality. He plays within the system. He plays within the flow. And the flow last year pretty much asked him to be at sometimes the number 3 option. And he's not a guy that's just going to take a game by storm. But this year he has to. And I think that's kind of more of the player that he is, more of the player that he was when he first got to Golden State, and more of the player that he was, of course, towards the tail end of his time in Minnesota. So Wiggins, it's been a bit. It's been a couple of years. But in addition to helping you defensively, he's back to being not just an offensive threat, but also more of a knockdown shooter. Kerr talked about before the season wanting Wiggs to get 6 to potentially 8 threes up per game. He's not taking as many per game as he did 2 years ago or even 3 years ago when the Warriors won a championship, but he's back to shooting an extremely efficient mark from 3. In fact, 41% is about 5 or 6 points above his career average and would track to be the best of his career. So Wiggins appears to be in a really good spot, and the Warriors need him, not just to be an offensive threat, but particularly to make threes with kind of the decisions that they're trying to figure out with their starting lineup, and that is kind of revolved around what to do at the 2 spot. I think DeAnthony Melton and his injury has had somewhat of a domino effect on the remainder of the roster, because though we saw 7 different starting lineups in the first 10 games for the Warriors, Melton was always supposed to be the starting 2. And so with Curry, you need Wiggins now to shoot the ball relatively efficiently from 3. You need him to take shots, because Lindy Waters right now, who's their starting 2, is a good 3-point shooter, but he's not a volume 3-point shooter. Lindy Waters III is not a guy who's going to be taking 7 to 8 threes per game like Curry obviously can. And I would say on some nights when he's feeling it, even Andrew Wiggins can. The fact that he also has made the bulk of his free throws, including 13 of his last 15 over the past 2 games in back-to-back nights, points to me to being in a really good spot, both mentally and physically right now. And he's also one of the few players that number one is in his prime, but also is a player that can give you 35 minutes if you need him to, and you don't have to worry about him being physically exhausted. Now, he's only playing 28 minutes per game overall this season, but I think that's, a byproduct of the depth the Warriors have, but also Kerr knowing when he can push the buttons of Andrew Wiggins and when not to. So again, when Kerr was talking about Wiggins and why he's been so good, particularly over the last 4 games in which he's eclipsed the 20-point mark for the first time since November of 2022, it's about where he is mentally. He came into camp in great shape. So far, he's been in a good spot. And I asked Steve Kerr, is it about keeping him there? How do you do that? Or is it something where you kind of just let him be himself? And I think Kerr is, he didn't want to, reveal the kind of the conversations that he is or isn't having with Wiggins. But to me, his answer basically just pointed to the way that Andrew Wiggins was around the championship and even the year after, before he had his extended absence, is the way that the Warriors have approached him, which is letting him be himself. He's not a very talkative guy, but if he's in a right place mentally, just kind of let him do whatever he needs to. And so far for the Warriors, it's been absolutely fantastic. The other part about the Warriors that's been interesting to begin this season is crunch time, or clutch time, I should say, as it's officially become a stat in the NBA. But the question of have they turned a corner in crunch time, to me, is still a bit TBD. But so far, again, they've been able to prove that it is different from last year. And this is what I mean by it. Last year, they played in 48 clutch games. That was the most in the NBA by far. They won half of them. So being 500 in clutch time is not perfect, but it's also not terrible. This season, they've only played in 8 clutch games through their first 16, so that's about half, but they're 5-3. 3 of their 4 losses have been in clutch time. To me, it's not necessarily about the record itself, but it's about the amount of games that they play in clutch time, because I think when they limit that, it allows Curry to have suppressed minutes, it allows Draymond to have suppressed minutes, and save those kind of go get and chase victory type games for Kerr. You can save those for some of the better opponents. So playing in clutch games against New Orleans and San Antonio, it felt like those were the kinds of games that they played in last year. And so that's something that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. I feel like the New Orleans game was a game that I felt like they should have put away the Pelicans. They chose not to. And that, again, impacted how they fell down the stretch of Saturday's game. And so if they're able to just simply limit the amount of clutch games they play, win or loss, that to me is the number that I'm more interested in than how many of these games they're winning. If the Warriors are able to stay out of clutch time, it means probably they're winning games in runaway fashion. And more importantly, they're keeping the minutes down of their most important players. I think that'll help them in the long run. And of course, as it points toward keeping guys healthy over the course of 82. Which brings us to tonight's injury report, brought to you by Boxer & Gerson, Northern California's premier workers' compensation law firm, helping injured workers get their lives back for over 40 years. For more information, visit boxerlaw.com. Evan Giddings with you live at Chase Center for Warriors Live here on 95.7 The Game. Also got you for Warriors wrap-up right after the Warriors take on the Brooklyn Nets, who are 7-10 this season. Warriors 12-4. And, of course, you can catch it all here on 95.7 The Game. But there's about a laundry list of players that are on the injury report for the Brooklyn Nets. And Bojan Bogdanovic, out, hasn't played at all this season. Dorian Finney-Smith, also out with a left ankle sprain. Dennis Schroeder, I saw warming up before the game, and so I think he's going to give it a go. But Ben Simmons is out for lower back injury management. Players, Jalen Martin, Noah Clowney, who's a backup center. And I think the most important name that I saw on the injury report who is doubtful is Nick Claxton. And that's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's the guy that the Nets identified in paying big money this most recent summer. But also, I think he's the one person, in addition to Thomas, that could challenge the Warriors tonight, because they've seemingly had trouble with athletic fives. And Claxton's not a guy that offensively is going to ruin a basketball game, but he can make things difficult on the Warriors, and it looks like he's not going to play as he has been dealing with a lower back. So listed as doubtful. Claxton, again, several inactives tonight for the Brooklyn Nets. Ben Simmons probably actually helps the Brooklyn Nets. He's not played very well at all whatsoever this season. And then Bojan Bogdanovic. So the Brooklyn Nets are pretty much going to be running with Cam Thomas, Cam Johnson, a couple of more interesting names to keep an eye on moving forward at the trade market. And then, who else Brooklyn decides to trade at this point is kind of just up to them. Dorian Finney-Smith is also a name, but a lot of 3-and-D players, a few are active, a few are not for the Brooklyn Nets. Zaire Williams is a player that we'll see tonight, probably most familiar with him in his time in Memphis. And the rest of those starters are going to be TBD. And, right now Brooklyn is a team that's 7-10, recently coming off a win against the Sacramento Kings, but prior to that, they'd lost 4 of 5, including some bad losses. The Philadelphia 76ers, who right now, as constructed, are not a very good basketball team. Back-to-back losses to the Knicks. And you even look earlier this season, lost to the Pistons, lost to the Hawks. This is a Brooklyn team that has pretty much just been up and down. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not they roll over in a game here on the road at Chase Center to a Warriors team that is, once again, favored by 13.5 points. As for the Warriors and their injury report tonight, they're going to be without, of course, DeAnthony Melton. The other player that was questionable heading into this game was Jonathan Kuminga, and he was dealing with an illness down in San Antonio that kept him out. Steve Kerr said that, again, it's going to be a game-time decision. No update, I believe, on that yet. And actually, I take that back. As of 4 minutes ago, Jonathan Kuminga is active, and so he's going to be playing in this game. That was also, I know that Kuminga isn't a player that's been putting up big numbers, but to me, a game on Saturday against San Antonio is a game where they miss someone like J.K., someone that can help you when your offense is struggling, but also a guy that's, at this point in the season, in November, he's someone that you can give heavy minutes to and that can take some pressure off of players that are either struggling, players that are having poor stints. He just provides another option for Steve Kerr. And in the toolbox of the 10 to 12 players on a given night that Kerr can use, I think Kuminga's skill set was particularly missed down the stretch of that Spurs game when they were just basically asking anybody to put the ball in the hoop, and no one was able to oblige them. So Jonathan Kuminga is active tonight. Warriors are at relative full strength, of course, outside of Melton. Meanwhile, the Brooklyn Nets have several inactives. This is Warriors Live, presented by Xfinity. At home or on the go, you'll get the fastest internet to all your devices. Evan Giddings at Chase Center, about 10 to 12 minutes away from the bottom of the hour, where Tim Roy will have the rest of your network pregame. He, along with Tom Tolbert, will have the call here on 95.7 The Game for the Warriors' 17th contest of the season, 12-4 against the 7-10 Brooklyn Nets team. And for our Take It to the Bank prediction tonight, again, this kind of has to do with the inactives for Brooklyn, but our Take It to the Bank prediction is brought to you by Fremont Bank, full-service banking, no compromises. I'm actually looking at Trayce Jackson-Davis tonight, and the number that I like would be 5.5 rebounds, or over 5.5 rebounds for Trayce Jackson-Davis. I think it's a game that you can lean a little more into your younger players, and if I'm looking at the two sort of centered, the two fives in that rotation, to me that this is a game you can bake a little more rest into for Kevon Looney. And so Trayce Jackson-Davis against a backup or two bigs for Brooklyn, whoever they trot out there, he should be able to at least clean the glass with relative efficiency. I don't think 6 rebounds is that high of a total for Trayce Jackson-Davis on a night like tonight. Elsewhere around the league, in our out-of-town game of the night presented by San Francisco International Airport, wherever your team goes, you can get there from SFO. The two games that were most interesting to me coming into the night, one actually just tipped off about 15 minutes ago, and it is the Denver Nuggets hosting the New York Knicks. And I'm always interested when you have those kind of big-name players, and it doesn't happen that often in the NBA because it feels like guys are always out, but Nikola Jokic versus Karl Anthony Towns. I thought that was a matchup that last year in the Western Conference semifinals when Kat was on the Wolves was one that was won by Karl Anthony Towns to relative surprise. I mean, Jokic still put up fantastic numbers, but Cat played with a physicality last postseason that I don't think we've seen so far in his career. Now he gets traded this offseason to New York, and of course he's playing with the New York Knicks now. And so how does he battle with Nikola Jokic against a Denver team that right now, both teams I think after slow starts to their season are beginning to find themselves, especially Denver, and both 9-win teams. I think that's a good matchup. The other one, of course, you got to keep your eye on just based on where the Warriors are in their schedule and who they got coming into town on Wednesday are the Oklahoma City Thunder. They are up at Sacramento, and a Kings team that is dealing with a lot of injuries, but seems to be sort of reeling as of late. They've lost 4 of 5 bad losses to the team the Warriors are hosting tonight, the Brooklyn Nets. They lost at home to the Atlanta Hawks, a team that last week the Warriors drubbed. And their only win in their last 5 games has been against the lowly Utah Jazz by 4 points. So the Kings are under 500 so far this season, and I'm curious to see if the Oklahoma City Thunder simply dispatch them or if the Kings, after playing some poor basketball, get back up off the canvas. They've been missing Sabonis, they've been missing Monk, they've been missing DeRozan, but how are they going to respond against an Oklahoma City team that is also dealing with injuries, Chet Holmgren being out, and just reintegrating Isaiah Hartenstein back into the rotation? So again, our out-of-town games of the night, I think Denver and the New York Knicks, those would be the ones, are the 2 teams that interest me the most. One other interesting note entering tonight for the Golden State Warriors, again, just a couple minutes left here in Warriors Live, is the fact that Buddy Hield is a player that was, of course, advertised as a shooter. I think, and Kerr talked about it pregame as well, how coachable and how responsive he's been, which has helped lead to his, I think, increased intensity defensively and just overall aid towards this team. Hasn't been shooting it well as of late, but as he stands tonight, 1,980 career three-pointers. He is just 2 threes shy of tying Dirk Nowitzki for 18th on the all-time three-point list in the NBA. On Saturday, with 3 threes, he moved past Joe Johnson. So a lot of former All-Stars, big names. Goes to show, of course, where the three-point shot has come to in the NBA, but also the fact that Buddy Hield has been doing this for an extremely long time. And I think people associate him with, the gunner, the chucker, and maybe not the heady player with how many threes he's made and attempted throughout his career, but he's quietly one of the most efficient three-point shooters, not just this season in the NBA, but over the last 5 or 6 seasons since he's stepped in the league. I think he's found a nice home here in Golden State, and tonight I would certainly bet him to pass Dirk Nowitzki. The fact that Dirk also has nearly 2,000 threes in his Hall of Fame career is just something of utter impressiveness. The fact that this guy was somebody who came into the league, threes weren't necessarily an emphasis at the time, especially for people that played the 4 or even the 5, depending on where he was at in his career. And Dirk Nowitzki making nearly 2,000 threes just opens your eyes to how far the game has come and how far he also helped push it for 4s and 5s and big men that can shoot. Something that the Warriors right now don't have outside of Draymond Green, who appears to be shooting about 45% from three-point range, but also might be a player that may need a little bit of help in the backcourt. I do want to also talk about that after the broadcast tonight, because assuming the Golden State Warriors are able to dispatch the Brooklyn Nets, I think there are a couple players to keep an eye on in this basketball game that might be available at the trade deadline. Some active, some not, but this is essentially a showcase game for a lot of Brooklyn Nets players. They're double-digit dogs. They have every reason to come out and let it fly, and every reason to put on a display for potential future teams, including the Golden State Warriors, that might be interested in their services. So interested to keep an eye on that as we move forward here. Evan Giddings turning things over to Tim Roy when we return. Golden State, Brooklyn, Dubs looking for a get-right opportunity after a late loss to San Antonio over the weekend in between their big matchup on Wednesday with Oklahoma City. But 7 o'clock tip here at Chase Center, Brooklyn Nets in town. We'll talk to you after the game. Evan Giddings with you live at Chase Center. You've been listening to Warriors Live presented by Xfinity. At home or on the go, you'll get the fastest internet to all your devices. Tim Roy coming up next on your home for Golden State Warriors basketball, 95.7 The Game.
It's game time, Bay Area basketball fans. Whether you're flying out to catch an away game or planning your next big vacation.